Crackanory, Too Cracked for TV. The Character Assassin by Tanya Qureshi. Read by John Robbins.
In the early noughties, a copy of a Clarice Swift crime novel was as ubiquitous as a self-important twat showing off their brick of an iPod playing Dido dressed in a pair of Ugg boots. You couldn't move without seeing one of her novels, which littered every holiday home, airport and commuter train across the country. In reality, Clarice was a woman called Rachel Harvey, who had been working tirelessly to turn out pot-boiling hits under that carefully selected pseudonym for the past 15 years. This way, Rachel could enjoy a life of total anonymity, while scribbling Clarice's way from obscurity to the top of the bestseller lists. She didn't care that most of her friends were settling down and popping out babies, because she was squeezing out money-spinning page-turners, and had a huge house that, yes, she did enjoy living in all by herself, thank you very much. Not that she had much choice, since her boyfriend of 7 years had left, tired of the constant tapping of keys in bed and the punishing deadlines which robbed them of any kind of social life. But who cares about him? In writing, she'd found her lifelong companion. It didn't matter that the only person at her last birthday party was her cat. So what? She had floor-to-ceiling windows and a chaise longue that once belonged to Linda LaPlante. But, as the song goes, the times, they a-change. Since the advent of the Kindle and trend for all things Scandi, we're talking masochistic murderers in Parkers here, not rye bread, her income and popularity had taken something of a tumble. Rachel's last 2 novels had failed to come within sniffing distance of the Amazon Top 100, and so she was feeling the heat, to say the least, when it came to putting pen to paper for her next opus. In spite of this finger-crippling pressure, she'd managed to write something. It had taken 2 years, but she thought this something was actually pretty good. Or at least half-decent, or total shit. Anyway, time would tell. That would be Julian Time, her editor, and pretty much the only real-life person she had any kind of relationship with these days. She'd been waiting eagerly to publish her latest offering, and his supportive gushing emails, "I'm sure it's going to be incredible, Rach. The outline and sample chapters you sent over were just brills. No pressure at all, whenever you're ready," had now morphed into the more desperate, "Anything more for me to see yet? How's that ending coming along? We really need a hit here. Part for Hiddleston, movie option stuff. A great story isn't just enough to sell books anymore." Oh, the irony. But, finally, she was finished, and with a trepidatious slide of her mouse, she clicked send on the sizable Word document. Julian's reply came within seconds. "Amazeballs. I'll get back to you soonest. Hope you're out celebrating. Sent from my iPhone." Celebrating, eh? She looked over at her lone feline companion, grabbed her coat, and decided to seize the moment. YOLO! Right? Soon she was sitting in the pub on the end of her street, lukewarm Prosecco in hand. She instantly felt like a big fat cliché. Had she really become that woman? A bottle later, Rachel slipped off her stool to make a trip to the ladies. She stumbled in, not even noticing the pretty girl gripping a sink, staring at herself in the mirrors. But whilst Rachel hovered over the yellowing seat, quads aflame, she definitely couldn't ignore the faint sound of sobbing. She gingerly emerged from the cubicle, hoping she might be able to sneak out unnoticed. But social pressure compelled her to rinse at least one of her hands. "God, how embarrassing. I'm that woman, aren't I?" said the girl, looking up, mascara streaking her cheeks. Rachel stared at her. Something about the woman made her feel an uncharacteristic urge to socially engage. After a few minutes, they'd moved back to the pub, and Rachel had poured the girl, whose name was Lara, a glass of her celebratory pea-sec. Lara explained why she'd been in such a state, a familiar tale of a man with a 7-year itch, a sudden change of heart, and a chivalrous "you deserve better" text. Rachel did her duty of attempting to cheer Lara up with some obligatory man-hating pseudo-feminist pick-me-ups. She swerved any personal details of her own life, offering simply that she was in the pub to mark the end of a project for work. After all, the last thing she wanted was someone who would ask questions about the downward slope of her career, or how she felt about that. But as the evening wore on and they transitioned onto Bailey's, the more Lara spoke, the more Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about her. As Lara was talking about where she worked and how she'd met Matt, her ex, finally Rachel felt compelled to ask, "Have we met before?" Lara shook her head. "No, I don't think so. Oh, look, they're closing. It was really nice to meet you, Rachel. Thanks for everything." She looked up with big, swollen eyes. Something about Lara made Rachel feel a pang of guilt, of pity. She shook it off, chalked it up to the Baileys curdling against the 2 bottles of fizz in her stomach, and strode off into the cold night air. The next morning, mouth like a hot bin bag, Rachel was rudely awoken by her cat Millhouse climbing across her face. She dragged herself out of bed and into the kitchen, slotting a life-giving capsule into the coffee machine. She then performed that favourite of all shameful hungover activities, checking all personal belongings made at home with you intact. She picked up her coat, except that it wasn't. Though a broadly similar generic navy pea coat, this one had a distinctive patterned lining that most definitely wasn't hers. She reached into the pocket and found a wallet. Lara's. They'd clearly accidentally switched at the end of the night. Probably best to drop it off back at the pub. Or, as she continued to rifle through the wallet and arrived at Lara's driving licence, she supposed she could just as easily pop round and make the exchange in person. Rachel stared at the photo on the pink card. Something about that face still strangely, compellingly familiar. Surely Lara wouldn't mind. After all, she'd be bringing back her coat, and also, Rachel had been a veritable therapist the night before. A mindfulness app personified. Yeah, she'd be grateful to see her. So soon there Rachel was, standing outside Lara's door, dressed in Lara's peacoat. "Thank God!" exclaimed Lara. "I didn't know how I was going to track you down again." After some awkward morning-after pleasantries and coffee, conversation turned once again to the recent demise of Lara's relationship. "Matt called me this morning. He says he wants the dog. What an asshole! Poor Flanders! He'd be distraught if he had to leave me." Rachel stopped. "Your dog is called Flanders?" "Yeah, Flanders," Lara said, gesturing over to the black miniature schnauzer curled in the corner. "Isn't he adorable?" "That's such a coincidence. I just wrote to—" Rachel trailed off. "Well, look, he's a dick. Don't give in." As Lara continued her rant, Rachel's mind wandered elsewhere. What an uncanny coincidence. The lead character in her new novel had a dog called Flanders, who's also used as a bargaining chip in a breakup. "OK, well, thanks for the coat and everything. I'd better get on," said Lara, eyeing the now very distant Rachel. "It's fine," she snapped, massaging her temples, her hungover mind whirring uncomfortably with the facts unfolding before her. She suddenly felt hot and confused, her eyes transfixed on Flanders. Rachel did her best to pull herself out of it and hurriedly suggested the two meet for dinner sometime. She couldn't fully explain it, but she knew she needed to see Lara again. "That would be great," said Lara, with the eager enthusiasm of a newly single woman desperate to fill her evenings. "Let me give you my number." Rachel went home and crawled back into bed, mind churning over what she'd just heard. Flanders, the ex, how Rachel had felt the urge from the start to talk to Lara, despite the fact she was one of those drunk, blubbering toilet girls who should be avoided at all costs. That's when Rachel realised that as well as those uncanny coincidences of detail, Lara even looked a little like the character in her new book. No, not just even a little bit, almost exactly how Rachel imagined her. Hair, figure, big blue eyes, with a beauty spot above her eyebrow. Just then her phone rang. It was Julian, saying he'd read the first few chapters and was encouraged, but "It hasn't changed much since the previous draft I read, has it?" She could sense the disappointment in his voice. She changed the subject, telling Julian about the new friend she'd made. He merely laughed at the coincidence. "You don't think it's weird? She has the same mole on her face, a very similar job, just went through a breakup, and has a dog called Flanders." "Well, you have a cat called Millhouse who you needed a joint custody agreement with your ex-boyfriend for. I just think these details are all more common than you realise." "Oh, so you're saying she's an unoriginal character?" Julian sighed. "Oh, Are you drinking again? I'm hanging up now. You're reading too much into it. I'll call you back when I've reached the end. Over the next few days, Rachel tried to forget about Lara. Julian was right. She was being stupid. After all, write what you know. Isn't that what they say? And what she knew was women her age going through breakups, replacing actual human offspring with pets. It was really no surprise that she'd met a woman similar to her character, similar to herself. But Rachel's suspicions continued to gnaw at her. Knowing, as only she, and technically Julian, did, what happened to the girl in the book. What happened at the end? As the week wore on, the desire to know more about Lara and to see her again became increasingly urgent. So, the following Friday, Rachel found herself opposite her new friend, sharing a bottle of Rioja and waiting for their calamari starter. After some small talk, Rachel decided to put her plan into action. So, where did you grow up then? Some similarities, but not enough to be sure. University? No, dead end. Rachel felt stupid, really stupid. What did she think she was going to find? Julian's words rang in her ears. These were small details, nothing else. She'd not made a new friend for years. There were probably loads of Laras out there. Was she really considering the possibility that a character she'd written about had come to life? Rachel took a deep breath and put the idea firmly to bed. It was madness. And, as it turned out, actually Lara was pretty decent company. Perhaps they could be friends after all. But then... So, listen, I have a story to tell, a confession, and I'm not proud of it, said Lara. It's about Matt. Welling up, Lara told Rachel about how she drunk-dialed him to beg for a second chance, only to discover that he'd already moved in with someone else. He'd obviously been with her behind my back all this time. I don't know what came over me, but I drove there way over the limit, just trying to catch a glimpse of her. I didn't see anything but her car and its stupid personalised number plate, ME1155A, Melissa. So I flew into a rage and, well, I slashed her tyres and smashed the windscreen. Lara threw her head back and laughed as tears rolled down her cheeks. She stopped when she saw the look on Rachel's face. Oh, don't look at me like that. I said I wasn't proud of myself. Was it a white BMW? Rachel asked coldly. Yeah, how did you know that? There it was. An identical chapter of happenings, straight out of the pages of Rachel's yet-to-be-published novel. She felt the paella she'd just eaten crawling its way back up her throat. It was undeniable now. Somehow, the character from her new book was sitting in front of her. Rachel hastily threw down some cash and left, leaving a confused and creeped-out Lara behind. What kind of supernatural joke was this? How didn't even begin to touch the sides? Rachel raced back home and opened the document on her computer, rereading all the details. It was all there. Almost verbatim. It was undeniable. Rachel then reread the key closing scenes as panic started to take hold. Rachel knew she had to stop her before it was too late, before Lara shot Matt in the face in the creepy car park by the river towpath. God, she was a cliched crime writer, but no time to dwell on that. After some hyperventilating and a few bottles of wine, it dawned on Rachel that perhaps, just as she had created the story, she could uncreate it. Rewrite the book. Rewrite the end. Rewrite Lara's future. Anything that could stop this sequence of events was worth a try, so she set about deleting passages of the book, key details, changing the character's appearance, her backstory, and, crucially, the ending. By the time the sun came up, it was changed beyond recognition. Lara, as she was gone. It wasn't exactly a crime novel anymore, but at least Rachel knew she wouldn't be responsible for anyone's murder. She slammed her laptop shut and went down to see Julian. She threw the laptop on the desk. I've made some changes. I don't want you asking any questions. This is the book I want published. Morning, Rachel. You look like shit. Tell me this isn't about that girl. Please, Julian, just do this for me. Replace the original one, delete it, begged Rachel, close to tears. He sighed, put a drive into her laptop, and started transferring the file over to his. You need to calm down. That girl is not going to kill anyone. Did you even sleep last night? Look, I can't explain how this happened, but it has. I can't be responsible for a murder, and if I am right, just think. What would happen when the book was published? The details would all be so similar. Julian rolled his eyes. Well, Rachel, even if I did believe you, even if I wanted to publish another version, I couldn't. There's no difference here, sweetheart. The document, it's exactly the same. Rachel walked over to the desk. He was right. The words were completely unchanged. She frantically checked her laptop, still lying open on the desk, the same again. All of the rewrites she'd made over the past 12 hours were gone. She stared incredulously at the screen. Listen to me. The plot isn't so far-fetched that it can't just be a coincidence. Maybe take a break, go on a detox retreat or something. You could use some booze-free days. Let's not let things slip to how they were before. Clearly, Julian thought the book was underwhelming drivel and destined for the bargain bin. Though that was all of little consequence now. He was wrong about Lara, about the murder. The fact that she was powerless to change it, the fact all her work had disappeared, was the nail in the confusion coffin. There was something bigger at play here, supernatural, paranormal, who knew? But it was real. She stormed from the office, resolved on finding and stopping Lara, even if it meant she had to physically grab the gun from her hand. She called Lara and left a voicemail. Then, before she knew it, she'd called her 15 more times. Nothing. Cold bitch, thought Rachel. Doesn't she know I'm trying to help her? The next day, Rachel awoke, feeling utterly impotent and with a burning rage growing inside her. She hated Lara and she hated Matt. She hated the universe or whoever was responsible for this bizarre, cruel trick. But most of all, she despised the man who'd left her those years ago and inspired her to write the stupid fucking book in the first place. She hated them all. But just as she was about to go and, calmly, break down Lara's door, she had an epiphany. Rachel realised she didn't need to find Lara at all. She could piece together the sequence of events from her own book and anticipate Lara's every move. After all, she'd written them. She hurriedly scrolled her way through the pages of the book, dissecting the scenes leading up to the denouement, the logic of the final moments, all of Lara's thoughts and actions. In so doing, to her dismay, she also discovered numerous plot holes and inconsistencies, and frankly, not nearly a satisfying enough build-up to make the motive of being dumped not seem underwhelmingly shit. But none of that mattered now. Thankfully, this book would never see the light of day. The important thing was to pinpoint the location and time of the murder, and she'd found it. Rachel pulled into the dark, empty car park and turned off her engine. She lay her head against the steering wheel. How had it come to this? Why was this happening to her? She prayed that no one else would drive in, hoping that she was wrong, and that it was all in her head, just like Julian had said. She waited, heart thumping in her chest. Then, down at the far end, some headlights appeared and a car drove in, illuminating a figure on the riverbank. The figure was Lara. A man got out of the car and started towards her. Rachel raced towards the two of them. She reached Lara first and grabbed at the gun in her outstretched hand. "Rachel, what are you doing here? Please, don't do this. You'll ruin your life, and I can't have this on my conscience." Rachel gripped Lara's arm as the girl was trying desperately to pull away. The man was coming quickly towards them now as the women continued to struggle in the light of the headlamps. Suddenly, a shot rang out. With a thud, the man hit the tarmac. "Run!" whispered Rachel. "This isn't your fault. I don't know how to explain it, but it's mine." A trembling Lara simply nodded her head and disappeared into the darkness. Rachel walked slowly over to the body and rolled the man to see his face. But rather than Matt staring back at her, she found it was the ex who had left her all those years ago. Rachel's mouth fell open, and a slow dread crept over her. No, it wasn't possible. She instinctively called out after Lara in the darkness, but no one answered back. Looking down at her former boyfriend's lifeless face, Rachel's mind lurched in horror. Had there ever been a Lara at all? Or had she existed only in her imagination, a projection of Rachel's murderous, vengeful fantasies? It all happened quickly after that. During Rachel's trial, her true identity as Clarice Swift was revealed. She feebly tried to explain Lara and the character who'd come to life. But Rachel wasn't sure of her own mind anymore. What was true? and what wasn't. So it was a pretty unconvincing performance. Her only line of defence was the unpublished manuscript, but when Julian provided it as a piece of evidence, it was all the jury needed to convict her. The central character of Lara bore an uncanny resemblance to Rachel herself, rather than this other fabrication she'd spoken of on the stand. A confused and fragile Rachel numbly accepted a lengthy jail sentence with a grim inevitability. The next day, a girl walked into Julian's office, pretty, with big blue eyes and a beauty spot just above her eyebrow. She smiled as he handed over a fat payment to Lara, his creative consultant, then sighed as she left silently. After a few short months, Clarice Swift's new book was at the top of the bestseller lists. Julian's inspired edits, to make the central character resemble the author, had really done the trick. People saw it as an insight into the mind of a murderer and couldn't get enough. Though the fact that Julian made those edits just prior to the trial was incredibly unhelpful to Rachel's case, it certainly was a unique and profitable marketing hook for a new book by a writer whose star was on the decline. Julian was right. A great story just wasn't enough to sell books anymore.